Perfect. Okay, first, good evening, everyone. Thank you for attending our virtual meeting. This is the Quaker City Montco Shrine Club's November 5th meeting. I know we have several friends who are attending this meeting. Also, we're going to open in proper Shriners protocol. Those of you who are not familiar with the Shriners, this is our proper way to open. The Quaker City Montco Shrine Club is a member of the Lulu Shrine Clubs at Plymouth meeting, which is outside of Philadelphia. Our potentate is an Old English term for a person who rules or governs. The potentate is referred to as an illustrious sir, and we refer to all of his officers as illustrious sirs. And the past potentates are illustrious sirs. The elected officers are divan members. Now we'll open. Good evening, everyone. Welcome, illustrious sirs, members of the divan, past presidents of the Quaker City Montco Shrine Club, ladies, nobles, and guests. Good evening.
Good evening.
I now call upon our high priest and prophet, Noble Dan Sheets, to give us an opening prayer. Dan, the floor is yours. Dan, we can't hear you. Dan, we can't hear you.
He's unmuted. The sound may be low on his sound.
Turn the sound on your computer up.
Well, he's unmuted. His sound may be low on his computer. He may not realize that. You know what I mean? In the sound setting.
Yeah.
Hey, Dan, call Debbie.
Heard you.
Okay, guys, we're gonna move
Hey,
on.
come on to be.
I'm gonna move on with Dan's committee.
All right. Good job, Dan.
So next, we'll do the Pledge of Allegiance. I will call upon my father-in-law, past President Barry Oppenheim, to lead us in the pledge. Dad, the floor is yours.
All right. We have a flag here. Normally, the person holding the flag is the flag and doesn't repeat the pledge, but we'll make an exception in this case. Members wearing a fez may hand salute, and veterans. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United
United States of America.
to the
To the
republic
republic which stands
Which stands
One
One
nation.
nation under God,
to God,
indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
For all.
Okay, thank you everyone for coming, attending our meeting tonight. Our 2020 officers are, my first vice president is Arthur Biner. My second vice president is Stinky, otherwise known as Donald Stinky Fink. Our treasurer is past president Dennis Gold. Our recording secretary is my father-in-law, Dad Barry Oppen. Our members at large are Jerry Springer, not the talk show host, Mark Weinstein, illustrious Sir Finky. Our stewards are Fred Roderick, Leon Werb, and Tom McDonald. And lastly, my wonderful wife, who's dealing with my 3 daughters upstairs and allowing me to be on tonight. Thank you all. So I'll now call upon our speaker, Mike Verta, who has worked on the Star Wars Reclamation Project in 4K. Mike, the floor is yours. I'm dying to hear all of this. Thank you. Everybody, I'm going to unmute until the end so we can hear Mike. So please mute yourself if you're able to.
I was going to ask you just before, do you want me to describe the project in general, like anything specific, or what specifically do you want me to talk about?
I'm very familiar with the project, with what you've done, at least for the videos I've seen, demo and other. I've read as many articles as I can find about it. But a brief synopsis, if you want, and also about I know it's about Star Wars, but also about how you restored the film, because I think that's a very interesting thing. That's not just a simple DVD thrown together, and how you've restored the images itself.
That's what I was going to say, because, Star Wars is ubiquitous in my life too. It's the reason I became a creative professional. I knew what I wanted to do when I was 5. That's when I first saw the film. But even though that's the case, the truth is that preserving cultural history, is something that everybody at least has some intrinsic sense of the value of. That's why we have museums and why we honor works of the past. So, there's been a lot of goodwill around the project from the beginning, because yes, it's about Star Wars and a lot of people love Star Wars, but it's also about essentially righting a wrong, an important cultural, historical wrong, which is that, Star Wars, it's, for better or worse, I guess, is a really influential part of our lore now. It just is. It's in the lexicon. You can go anywhere in the world and they've at least heard of Darth Vader, and they usually know what the Force is and why it may be with you. And this has been the case for going on almost, we're going to be going into 50 years. So at the point in 1997, 20 years after that film came and changed everything about the way we make films and introduced all kinds of new technologies, and 20 years after that film came out, George Lucas went back and made a number of changes to the film, which is a temptation that every artist faces, because you grow as a human and as an artist, and so you're always tempted to go back and, oh God, if I would go back, I could do it all different. But it's like technically his film, he has the right to do it, but when he did that, he very deliberately put destroy orders on the original versions of the film. And that's not a metaphor, that's literal. There were, while all versions of the film, any actual film reels that were projected are ultimately supposed to be returned to the studios, sometimes they don't get returned right away. Sometimes it takes a while. Sometimes they end up in private collections, which they're not supposed to. And so there were standing orders. If anybody receives back a print of the original version of Star Wars, they're supposed to destroy it. And it was his wish that original version of the film, the one that started all of this, would be forever forgotten and replaced with the new version, which is inferior in a lot of ways, just from basic filmmaking standpoint and from a technological standpoint. And there's a lot of discussion about why he did that. But the point is that I found myself among no shortage of people who felt very strongly about the impact of that first film. And while I feel like he's free to do whatever he wanted, we wanted that original version to survive. Well, that was not to be. So I began a personal project myself. I had already been working as a professional in the post-production business. I had a post-production company, so visual effects and image manipulation of all kinds was in my wheelhouse. Those were things that's what I was doing for a living, in addition to what was actually my primary job, which was a film and television composer and session keyboard player. And so it was a situation where I felt like this is something somebody had to do. Somebody had to try to save that first version of Star Wars and do a restoration of it just for posterity's sake. And I had the knowledge and the equipment and the resources to do it. Over the course of time, I mean, that's been, 20 years, more so, it's going to be 25. The technology continued to improve. Sources for my restoration became increasingly available. When I started, we were working in standard definition. It was just the very, the resolution of televisions from the 70s and 80s. Since then, we've gone to HD, right, and 4K and all of that. So eventually, I ended up in a situation where we were doing scans, extremely high resolution scans of original surviving film elements that had been projected in theaters in '77. And one particular type of film is a Technicolor type of film, doesn't fade over time. So the colors were every bit as vibrant as they were the day they were projected, and began a process of collecting all of these prints and sources to try to assemble a restoration, the best quality restoration of that film as possible. Without going into a huge thing about all the technical challenges that are there, it's not easy to do it properly when you have damaged elements. And essentially Star Wars is nothing but damaged elements, because the original camera negative was damaged and was altered. So there was a technical challenge, which is that I knew technically I could put the film together and have at least somewhere for posterity a 4K restoration of the film. but not at the quality that I remembered, not at the quality that something that we want to really leave for generations would exist. And so I went down to a very deep rabbit hole of coming up with some new techniques and new technologies to improve the quality of the restoration. And I happened to have friends at a number of universities, Stanford and Chalmers in Sweden, that had done advanced imaging research, and started talking to them about some of the ideas that I had, some new approaches for taking all of these elements and being able to put them together and take the very best parts of them and reconstruct an image that was every bit as good, or in some weird cases better, than what was ever seen in a theater in 1977. And it was not very long down that process that I saw the results were working. And that's, of course, that's what was the fuel to keep going, as I was seeing shots from that original film that in a way I had never seen, and had never been seen, still haven't ever been seen by anybody. So it's so those techniques and those technologies that I've developed, of course, it could be used for any film. And at one point, I actually did a presentation for a number of studio heads, showing them the technologies and saying, this is the kind of thing that we can do for any kind of film. But my motivation was Star Wars. And so along the way, there's a lot of people who've tried to restore that film, and because there's no shortage of fans who want it, and it's never been embraced. The efforts have never been embraced in any official capacity, largely because George Lucas was the sole owner and controller of the Star Wars property, and he would have nothing of it. And then when eventually he sold off Star Wars and sold it to Disney, then we were having discussions with Disney and Fox, and they were in the middle of a merger, and it was a lot of like, we can't touch that right now because Fox owns this and Disney's going to get this, but George still lose. And there was a lot of legal stuff. And this was 5-6 years ago. And, but they said, this is amazing. It looks great. We should maybe do a thing when all the dust is settled. And so, about once a year, we go back and test the waters and see if those people are ready to have those discussions. And we never get shut down. We always get a little, maybe a baby step or two. So we sort of, remain optimistic that sooner or later, that version of Star Wars will be released to the public, because I would love for everybody to see what that film actually looks like. And if for no other reason than somewhere, one of our really important pieces of cultural history survives in a worthy capacity. As Americans, I mean, you go to Europe and you've got churches that are the thing of thousands of years old. The culture and the history is not only important, but we appreciate it. Americans, weird as it sounds, Star Wars is one of our things. I mean, we did that. We gave that to the world. So it would just be nice to have it exist. And then, of course, there are lots of other films in the lexicon that could benefit from the technologies, but it's been a labor of love. I've spent a ton of money on it and time, and it's been intellectually challenging and creatively challenging. But I've never met anybody who, especially people who are Star Wars fans, who haven't seen those images and they just go, "Oh my God, I've never seen it look like that." And that's the best. That's the most satisfying part about the process, is seeing people rediscover. I mean, even when they know every frame of the film backwards and forwards, and then they see this and it's like it's the first time. And that's a pure joy for everybody involved. I don't know if that was a brief synopsis, but it was a synopsis.
Well, that's what definitely drew me in, because I actually, after watching your video and then looking at the snapshots of it, I went back and I rewatched Star Wars all over again. I'm like, wow, I never actually noticed that was even there, especially the land speeder spot in the desert. I'm like, I never saw those details to it. And there's another side, I think it was up in the clouds, where you see more of the detail of, what is it? Not one of the antennas. I'm not calling it correctly, but
Yeah, you're talking about, I think you're talking about Yavin where they're taking off.
yeah. And just the level of detail that you don't see, and it's not it's not the stuff that was put out on the DVD or the I don't know if there's a Blu-ray copy of it, but on the DVD, that was animated, and I never liked that one. And seeing what you put out there to me was absolutely amazing.
Yeah, thank you. It's interesting because I think people, even if you don't work in post-production or in filmmaking, I think people not wrongly have the impression that with computers you can do anything now, and that's true. But if you go to restore a painting, the idea behind a restoration is that you reveal what it was, not that you repaint it or change it. You want it to be as in the least amount of invasive process that you can muster. You don't want to be destructive. You just want to try to remove things which were not part of the original painting and happened over time. That requires both some technical mastery, whatever that skill is, but also in some aesthetic sense. And I remember a couple of years ago, I was in Italy and saw the Sistine Chapel, and there's been so much controversy about that restoration. And when you see some of the stuff, it just reminded me of how difficult sometimes those decisions can be. But when you have the computer and the power to do anything, it's that much easier to possibly do more harm than good, because you can do anything. You can paint anything, you can fix anything, you can degrain something and make it all smooth. And so one of the things that's really made this restoration unique or challenging or difficult was that I wanted it to be as pure as possible. I didn't want to do any visual effects work to it. I didn't want to clean it up. I wanted to pull it out. I was convinced that in all of these disparate pieces of film was a complete picture, and it was hiding in the details. And so all of the research and development and all of the time was based on a very purist philosophy about restoration. Let's not improve it. Let's not put stuff on it. Let's draw stuff out of it. And so when it's successful, that's why you see things that you haven't seen before, because they were always in there. But the nature of film is such that no one print that we go to see in a theater, no one frame of imagery contains all of the data that was originally, filmed, because there's film grain and generations that obscure or hide that data. But if you could take 10 pieces of film and you could put them all together and draw from all of them, now you could fill in all the holes. And when that works, as labor intensive as it is, now you're literally seeing a complete picture instead of a partially obfuscated picture, and all kinds of stuff shows up you never saw before, in detail and in colors. And so it's cool because it's not tricks, it's not computer tricks. In many ways, the process is sort of antiquated. It's just using very high-tech methods to do it, But yeah, it's cool to see for everybody. I mean, that's what, otherwise I would go crazy. It takes so long to work those shots and so long to do that stuff that if it wasn't that cool, I don't think I could keep the energy up because it could be days or weeks on a frame, just one frame, and just working it and working it and working it to find all of the data. And at some point you just go, this will take me the rest of my life. What am I bothering for? But if you can muster the discipline and get to that next level and see that thing, then you're like, oh, okay, this is cool. I'm going to stay on. And then my son, in the years I've been doing this, my son was born, he's 10 now. And when he was 5, I showed him, my restoration. He saw Star Wars and he became a big Star Wars fan. It still works. So, now he's as much of an impetus to continue to improve it, to continue to fight for its release, just because you see, this film is still relevant. Kids still love it. And they should see it because they've never seen it. Whole people have never actually seen that original film. So what else? What else? It's a slippery slope too, because I could legitimately talk about this. I think I did. The video he's referring to, if you haven't seen it, was a YouTube video in which it was sort of a off the cuff thing. It was May 25th. I think it was maybe even this year. No, was it this year? Maybe last year. I don't know. Which is the day Star Wars came out in 1977. And I realized I had just never talked on YouTube on my channel publicly about the restoration, not in 20 some years. So it was sort of an off the cuff decision. I was like, well, I think I'll just do a thing. And then it ended up just getting all these views and a lot of attention, which I guess I should have expected because Star Wars has a lot of goodwill around it. And that's actually been an important part of the process, because all along the way, when people would learn about what I was working on, I can't even tell you the number of people would say, well, how can I help? Is there anything I can do? Do you need money, or there was always, especially in the professional community, in filmmaking and creative communities, because almost everybody that I know who works in the business because of Star Wars. It's like we all feel that we owe it a lot. And so, when including the majority of the artists who made the film over the years, I've become friends with almost all of them, and all the model makers and matte painters and all the people who worked in costumes and every aspect of production on that original film, a lot of whom shared with me over time, that they felt sad that their work was gone. A lot of them, the shots that they worked hardest on that won them the Academy Award are now not in the film. They've been cut out, gone, and replaced with dated looking CG. And so there's also been a lot of outpouring of support and gratitude just from that standpoint, where people are grateful that their work is being honored and preserved. So that was sort of an unexpected little part of it, to find myself connected in a communal way with the very people that made that film and that inspired pretty much my whole life, from the time I was 5. That's been a really nice byproduct of the whole process. But the project is not without controversy, because when people see the film, they say, you need to release this, the whole world should see it, which I happen to know, having done quite a bit of work on official Star Wars projects for Lucasfilm in my business. I've done a lot with licensees and stuff. I've been told that if I went this far into the world with releasing my restoration, the legal hammer would fall on me. The biggest legal hammer. I mean, the Disney Corporation's complete litigious, that would be over in seconds. So there's no shortage of Star Wars fans who are sort of upset with me about it, because they've seen it and they go, well, this is fantastic. You should put this out, and and they will hear nothing of the consequences that would befall me. And so I empathize with them on some level, and I weather these slings and arrows of my outrageous fortune. But as it were, I still remain optimistic that it'll see the light of day one time, if for no other reason than everybody who sees it in any official capacity is excited about it. I've never had anybody go, well, no, that's not. I've heard only the opposite. I've heard this is fantastic, but there's all these obstacles. So I've remained optimistic, for going on 20 years. But I think, I think sooner or later it'll come out. And when it does, it would be a real crown jewel for the studio, and a really, really neat experience for people to see. I think we're all used to now that projects get repackaged and reissued and redone. Like, every movie that comes out, there's going to be 20 versions of it. There's a Blu-ray version and the 4K version of it, and then there'll be the 8K version of it. And it's new. It's a new remaster. We're sort of used to that, but in a lot of ways, we know that most of the time it's dressed up a little bit, but it's not like some radically different experience. And what would be cool was that for the first time now, in going on 40 some, closing in on 50 years, this is actually a completely different experience. And so it would just be really neat to see that go wide. Just curious, how has any of you heard about this project before tonight, or had seen the YouTube video, or is this the first you're hearing of it? This sort of little anecdotal, I would love to know.
I have never heard of it.
Well, are you a
Me either. Mike brought it up, and here you are.
and any of you Star Wars fans?
Absolutely.
Look at my shirt.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. I do have a question for you though. As I'm listening, I'm in IT and I do photography and everything else, and I work with Macs and other things. When you're doing your restorations, are you using like Adobe? Are you using higher product type of software? Are you working with the raw graphics on this? Because when I do my photography and I transfer it over to my Macs, I use basically anything in a raw image. And I know when you have everything in raw images, transferring and working with it within the either Elements or Photoshop or something of that high class, high end software, you're able to manipulate. And once you start bringing it down to either JPEG or GIF or PNG resolution, which makes it easier to bring out for the internet, what do you use? How do you feel about working with certain projects or programs and not, and with the quality of the changing of the resolution, and knowing that you're satisfied with it? Because you could be working with a frame that could be almost 700 megabytes to a gigabyte worth of information and pixelation within the frame itself, and now you're going to be compressing it into a smaller version of it.
Lots in there, and I'll try to keep it interesting because it's technical. So in the post-production world, where we create the images that ultimately go out into the world, the pipeline that we work in natively is always much more robust than the end user usually has. We're used to having huge amounts of data, and in this case, the film scans, when the film goes through the scanner, and every frame is essentially captured as a digital file. They are 16-bit uncompressed images. They're not raw, but they behave like raw. They're actually called DPX files, or in some later cases, it's a Lucasfilm proprietary format. But they're uncompressed files, and they're huge because they're natively 4K every single frame, and there's going to be 260 or 270,000 frames in the film. Each one of them is a huge file. And not only that, but we scan the film at multiple exposures. Remember, it's film. It's good old-fashioned, celluloid. It has light as a crucial component of it. And film is capable of capturing a huge range of dark to light, much more so than we can ever see at one time. So it's not even just scanning the film once, it's scanning the film multiple times at multiple exposures, and every one of those frames totally uncompressed, 16-bit color. So the actual working with the files, we're talking about huge files that have to move in an uncompressed way in multiple layers. And that does require very, very robust pipelines in terms of, lots of hard drive space, hundreds and hundreds of terabytes. I have big arrays, rated arrays that handle the transfer, usually through fiber optic stuff. They're managed usually by Linux devices. So to the first part, ultimately it may get compressed down, or it may be, we may change the bit depth, or we may do this and that, depending on where it's going to end up. But yeah, it requires very robust pipelines and powerhouse workstations with tons of graphic cards. I mean, it's all top stuff, and that's gotten better over the years. So they get faster and faster and faster. But they need to be real workhorses to handle the actual stuff. In terms of what software that I use, everything that I do the restoration on is custom and proprietary. They are plugins or software that I developed with some people along the way. usually because not any one of the commercial packages could readily do what I wanted it to do in the way that I wanted to do it. Over the years, as I've refined the technique, I think we're approaching a point, and you know, and the Adobe suite of software, Photoshop and After Effects, or some of the more commercial tools like Nuke. You know, I think you could get pretty close using those tools. If you wrote a handful of plugins for them, you could probably do that. But it usually comes down to, it's not that they couldn't, it's just that nobody's ever thought of doing it. Nobody's ever written a plugin for After Effects or for Nuke to do whatever one particular part of
So
it.
basically, it's a customized software. Do you prefer PC over Mac? Because I know, as of being a bit of a Mac person, I'm turning 50 at the end of this year. So when computers started coming, you know, you had Macintosh, which started being more or less everything from either graphics from to letter layouts and everything, Quark Express and all of that, Adobe Illustrator back in the day. Nowadays, with the newer Macs, especially the new Mac desktops that just came out that replaced the round desktops, you're looking like the old Mac servers that you can go with 64 gig to 128 to 256 gigabytes of RAM. And that's not including your, as you said, you have a RAID of maybe 16 to 20 to 50 gig or terabyte, or however you're running it. And it's going to be all either connected via a LAN drive, you know, for your NAS drives or for your USB 3.0s or anything like that. As a technological way, I find this very interesting because I build networks for a living. And to understand where you're coming from, if you're using a Linux-based system, if you're running with this and that, to be able to work and be able to have a successful connection and not to drop anything, and especially if you're scanning at multiple different scans and multiple different layers at 16-bit, that can take up so much memory and space that you can possibly crash if you don't. And then all that work that you've just done is for naught.
Yeah, and you know, I started, I mean, I grew up on Apples and Macs. I had the 2 Plus, and I had the original Mac and the SE and the SE30. And as a musician, you know, Pro Tools and other music software was almost always Mac based. When I built my post-production studio, is when, never having really had any kind of bias between Mac and PC, I've always just been horses for courses. If it works and does, you know, that, and especially now where I go back and forth all day. It doesn't matter anymore. But as I got into more robust needs, Mac was not able to keep up in that environment, in that it wasn't as infinitely customizable as I needed it to be. And more importantly, nobody that I knew was writing software for Macs. Mac was always, you'd port it over to Mac at the end, but it was always developed on a Windows-based stuff. So my entire world, all the heavy lifting in my world left Mac and went to PCs. And then eventually the most critical aspect of the data, which is the servers, the 200 terabyte servers, they're now network servers, or fiber, those are managed by Linux boxes, because the Red Hat Linux stuff was so robust and so simple and so bulletproof. So when it really came to making sure the data was safe, there's usually a Linux box or 2 or 3 that's overseeing all of the traffic back and forth. The workstations are PC workstations, and they, you know, when you work in visual effects, your systems have to be absolutely bulletproof. We don't update once they're, you know, once it's locked. You have to. In fact, a lot of the computers are air gapped. They don't even connect to the internet, because every second counts. If you have 270,000 frames to render on a deadline, and every one of those frames takes 5 seconds, you know that's, you know, then you'll hit the deadline. Okay, but if it takes 7 seconds, so absolutely, your workstations is an absolute necessity. And whereas when I was growing up, you know, PCs and Windows had this like reputation as always being crash prone or whatever. I mean, I cannot remember the last time my systems went down. So that's just, but that's a discipline too.
A
We're not-
Linux system is a whole different animal than it is from PC. So I can understand, running as like a hosting system running only on the Unix, but still having the software being developed for the PC and then whatever you're using for the Macintosh. Thank you for that intellect. That was, I was wondering how that would be done, because back in the day, and like she said, everything was, when it came to visual effects or audio effects and things, mostly was done, with the old Apples, the original Macintoshes.
And well, for years, for the first 5 years, 7 years, it was all being done on Macs. And at the time I was using open source software and didn't yet have the relationship with people who could write more advanced stuff. So, it's only when it got to a point that the data loads were so huge that I was sort of compelled to move to in another direction. But yeah, it's it's a huge part of the process. And I'll tell you, like, as an example, it used to take, when a frame would come up, I would used to, 10, 15 years ago, a frame would come up and it would take a second to load. And then I could load like a few frames at a time, and that's all I could work with. And so there's a lot of times I was just sitting around waiting for the computer to be able to just bring up the data. And things have gotten so much faster now that huge parts of the restoration now happen completely in real time, just scrubbing in 4K with multiple layers, totally uncompressed. So the technology's made it easier and faster as we go. And now there have been some advances in artificial intelligence such that I think there are some of the more labor-intensive aspects of the restoration could now actually be done algorithmically or by AI. I think there are some of the alignment things that I have to do that I think now a network could be trained, a discriminator could be trained to do that automatically, which would cut the workload for any individual shot to a fraction, and restore the work to where I mostly like to do it, which is in the aesthetic domain, making sure it's right. We haven't obfuscated details or lost colors. But it's always a dance between all the technological stuff.
Did you order these?
Yeah.
Mike, would you mind me showing what example of some of your work? Do you want me to show it, or do you want to show it?
No, you show it. I did, please.
Okay, let me make sure everyone else is muted, because I see some people unfortunately bleeding over. So bear with me 1 second. Okay, hold on 1 sec, guys. I'm going to share my screen here. Can everyone see that?
Not yet.
How about now?
I'm seeing, yes. There you go. Oh,
Okay.
this.
Okay, I'm going to play this. Ready?
I don't think the audio is coming through.
Oh,
It's okay. You know what? Scrub forward though, because I think this is your before. And I mean, if you find the spot, you go back and forth, you can see the before after. It's pretty profound. I love this shot.
okay, hold on. Let me go forward.
Scrub forward. This was one of the earlier shots that I did. And what he's showing, by the way, is stuff from either my YouTube channel or my Vimeo channel, where I break down a lot of the shots technically and talk about what I did, how I did it, and then of course there's always the fun part where you see the before and the after. There's always that. But I learned, that if I put that before and after in too early, people stop after that. Then they don't listen to me babble on for another 30 minutes. And I want them to listen to me babble on, so I save the really good stuff now for later. This shot is actually, like I said, it's one of my favorite shots because there you go. That's the restoration. Yeah, that's how we saw it in a theater right there. And that's what the shot actually looks like. So there is just, I mean, Stevie Wonder could see the difference there. That's again, you know, I can't emphasize enough that was as much a surprise to me as anybody else. When I first realized what was in that shot, it was like, what? Look at that.
This shot was actually, what really reeled me in, because I saw that and I'm like, wow, it actually looks like space. And I'm looking at, and I watched Star Wars on a 75-inch high def with a UTV, and I'm like, and it still looks a little white, but with this, it's the pure blackness of what space would look like.
Well, and I will tell you that there are multiple layers in this original shot, right? Which are the models, and they had to film each one of them separately and put them together. And as they do that, it's generational loss. Every time they run it through the optical printer, it gets fuzzier and it gets less detailed, and it loses color. So what was amazing about this data recruitment was that it found so much stuff in there that it seemed to have taken generations out of the original optical composite and stabilized those images. My personal favorite part about this shot is in that first lead ship, in that first lead X-Wing, you can see a little bit of the gold paint on that nose right in front of the cockpit if you look. And that is the kind of thing, yeah, you can see it right there, that historically gets
Right there.
not survive the optical compositing. And in fact, if you really look, you can catch just a touch of what looks like the orange visor for the little pilot model guy. So, but again, you know, I always have this weird moment because it's hard for me to take credit really in a way, or to a sense of ownership about this, because truly my approach has been to bring out what was in there. It's nothing I've really done. But you know, that being said, it does take quite a bit of work and a lot of aesthetic, you know, get careful aesthetic choices. So when it's right, it's really cool. And I can say with confidence, none of us ever saw that shot like that. Not ever, not in May of 1977. It's just really neat to see. I forget too, like, you know, when you go back and you show some of these clips, it's been a while since I've seen many of them. And yet it's always like seeing them for the first time.
I know you worked hard on the Mos Eisley with the land speeder. Is it okay if I put that one on?
Yeah. I don't know if people know, and again, if you're not a Star Wars fan, I apologize because this is, but this shot was, it's the worst shot in the film. It always was. There's a little story about this shot, but in the end, this little land speeder was a real thing. It had wheels and they drove it down in the sand. So of course they had to paint out the wheels, and it didn't work very well. And that's why you can see the stuff that's underneath it. You know, the sort of painting stuff, and they smeared Vaseline, literally Vaseline was smeared on the lens underneath the ship to help blur it out. And it was passed through a lot of generations. And this version that you're seeing this is literally what it looked like in the theater. I mean, I even remember that as a kid. It just was like, well, something wasn't right there, but it was fortunately not too long. But everybody who made the film hates this shot. They all just put their head in their hands when it came up. Nobody wanted to even talk about it. So it was one of the test cases for me where I thought, if these processes can fix this shot, they can fix anything, because this is truly a disaster. And any kind of restoration effort will be a garbage in, garbage out process. When they did the special edition of Star Wars, they went back and they refilmed, or they pulled out some of those original elements. And I think that's what he's showing some of things now. They pulled out some of those original elements, and the original photography really wasn't as atrocious, but it never made it to the actual film that way. So if you see that before and after, which I think will be coming up, it's the biggest change. It's the biggest improvement in the restoration, just because that original shot was just unforgivable. And in this video, I talk a little bit about the process that I use to find the data. Like in a shot like this, where do you find color when the whole thing seems like it's just washed out, you know, urine yellow? How do you get this out of that data. Yeah, this is the after. So, however, one thing, if you don't, stop it for a second so I can just point something out.
Yep.
Which that with this restoration, as I talked about, you don't want to change it. You want to bring out what is there. So we found the blue sky. I found that color. I found details that were missing, but we also preserved that slightly discolored patch beneath the land speeder that those guys hand painted to try to paint out the wheels. Today, you could completely make that go away. It would not be even a very big deal to make that perfect and make this an absolutely perfect shot, because we can do anything. But then it wouldn't be a restoration anymore. It really wouldn't be restoring what it was. It would be improving it. And that has just never been the spirit of the restoration. If you're trying to preserve something in history, let it be what it was. So one of the reasons I have pride in this shot is not only that it's now, you can now look at it without wanting to throw up, but it has the essence of the hand-tooled, imperfect, technologically limited, techniques in it. It's still that shot. It's just not a complete, blight on on cinema history. Yeah, I was this shot I did earlier in the process when I had stepped up to true 4K. It was one of the earlier shots that I tackled, just because I knew if this shot could come out acceptable in any way, then we were home free. It's and I'm happy to report that all the original crew members who've seen it, this is now their favorite shot, because they're like, oh my God. They feel a great cosmic wrong has been righted just by this. So good karma. Yeah, these videos, and have had people have been watching them for a long time, and they're off the cuff. They're usually just extemporaneous descriptions of the process. It's a very niche crowd that wants to hear me talk for 30 minutes about how I colored a pixel. But even casual Star Wars fans, I know, really appreciate, seeing this shot back in the film, for starters, and being able to see it at this quality. Because again, everybody who knows the film well knows this shot and knows why it was cut out from the film in 1997. This shot has not been seen since 1997. And it never looked like this. So that's cool. See, now every time I think, God, come on, we got to get this film out. Now I just want to, come on, we got to put this film out. Why are people not seeing this? This is not right.
Can I put in another one? Are you okay with that?
Of course, yeah, as many as you want, sure.
Okay.
I've done presentations in theaters, screenings in theaters, where these are all up on on a full size screen in a theater, and it's glorious. It's so cool to see. And I don't have a movie theater in my house, unfortunately. So even for me, I remember the first time I did a presentation, and it was projected, 20 some feet across. I remember I was in the middle of talking, and the image came up, and I just stopped talking. I was looking at the image, and I realized everybody was just looking at me because I had just stopped in the middle of a sentence to look at the work. It's just like, oh, that's right. I'm giving a presentation. This is another shot a lot of people like because it appeared in this quality, and just this very rough, sort of washed out quality. And with our guy standing in a garbage can, we'll never not be able to see that garbage can he's standing in. Sorry if you didn't know that. Let's see, garbage can on a pole. Here I'm showing like the last time we ever saw this shot. It was colored a little bit like this. This would be a DVD back in 2006 or 2004. Which, that's a little better. It's a little better, but nothing like what was really in that shot, which I think will be coming up in a minute. And like everything else, there you go. the detail in it and the color and the fidelity of the little ships that fly. It's just a night and day experience. Again, another shot which was cut from the film. In fact, most of these shots that are on my channels are all they're all not in the film anymore and haven't been since 1997. They were cut out for various reasons. In many cases, sort of considered that they just were not technologically or not technically, passable anymore. People just couldn't see through them. But what was funny is they were replaced with CG, which immediately became dated and looks terrible. So, I mean, they never even went back and redid the CG for it. But none of that is necessary. This film can be left to be, what it was. That little matte painting up there, the Masasi Temple. The matte painter, Harrison Ellenshaw, who painted all these matte paintings, he and I have worked very closely and carefully on these paintings because he was the only one on the planet who knows what they really look like, what they really are supposed to look like, and in terms of their color and in terms of the composition. So so it was really fortunate to be able to show him the progress on these paintings and say, so, what was this really like? And in many cases he said, oh, no, this is it's a sandier, it's a pinker, sandier color. And, and we would work together to get to the original and correct look for it. And that was true for his paintings of Mos Eisley and for this temple and for the Death Star where Obi-Wan is, suspended over the huge fall. And for the Millennium Falcon matte paintings, it's been really, really cool working with him. I've been to the Lucas Archives several times and seen the original matte paintings, and for a time had sort of thought about maybe scanning the original paintings. Many of them have darkened over time. The oil paints have darkened, and they don't. Like, it's a real tragedy, but the great matte painting in Indiana Jones at the end with the Ark of the Covenant, and there's that huge giant warehouse of boxes, that painting has darkened so much you can almost not see anything because it's just paint and doesn't last. But, scanning these paintings again and redoing it, well, now you're changing the film. Now you're using technology to change it. And so I decided, no, let's stay true to it. And grab what's in there. There's the restoration, and just work with the painter, and under his guidance, restore it to its former glory. Again, the quality that you ultimately see there, we never saw it that way in the theater. It was not capable. The process wasn't such that we were ever able to see it in that fidelity. So there's a Star Wars that just literally has never been seen, not ever. And it's in all these shots. I think almost all of these have something in them that, that's a quality that hadn't been seen. This is a shot cut out of Star Wars. It was replaced with new CG kind of puppet looking guys. Just gone. And that's because they decided they didn't like the Wolfman mask guy. George decided 25 years later, he didn't like the wolf guy anymore, so he got rid of the wolf guy. Even though a lot of people like the wolf guy. So we just said, well, there's no reason. This shot looks great. Put it back. Really random and arbitrary discussions. And we haven't talked about it, and it's probably because to me it's been talked about, is it maybe too much, about all of the actual, beyond the technical changes, all of the filmmaking, storytelling changes, which people feel even more passionately about than the technical changes. There are some story and structure and character development and dramatic art changes that are really curious and universally to the detriment of the film, which happened when the film was changed in '97. And they're not nitpicky little things, they're large things. And a lot of the passion that exists out in the world for that original version of Star Wars is really based on those things. But here we're sort of doing both at the same time. We're addressing the technical stuff and the shots that were cut out. And by putting them back in, we're also restoring the dramatic flow of the story and the pace of the edits and a few of the other things which were lost in the changes. Yeah, another matte painting that obviously today you could completely improve this, and yet you don't need to. With the restoration, you both preserve the film as it was and where filmmaking technology was in 1976, and yet also present the shot, in a quality that we haven't seen before. You'll see that pop here in a second. This one isn't as night and day, but there you go. It's just nice and stable, and the colors are good, and there's no dirt and garbage all over it, and it's not bouncing all over the place, and the black levels are correct. And so this is this shot, as much as anyone, embodies the spirit of a restoration. Yeah, you could film new guys. You could put guys in these costumes and you could film them, and then it wouldn't be paintings of guys right up in the front of them. They're just paintings. Yeah, but that's not what we did in 1976. We didn't do that. We had paintings. It's a good painting. Put it up. The temptation is always there because the technology is such that we can do anything. But I've decided its heart will be pure.
I'm gonna put this one on. Is this scene okay?
Yeah, anything. And like I said, Star Wars is one film, but Star Wars is not the only film that that can benefit from these techniques. And that was the essence of the first presentation I ever gave, was that in Star Wars, in a lot of ways, represents a worst case scenario for a restoration, because the original elements are gone. The original camera negatives have faded into almost nothing because they were unknowingly shot on film that didn't last. Nobody knew that when they were shooting Star Wars, but the Kodak stocks that it was shot on deteriorated very, very quickly, such that they were retired from service not long after. So it just happens to be that, unlike some other films that still have great camera negatives, Star Wars does not have a great camera negative. And so the only way to restore it is from prints, which are normally considered too far down the generation line to be any good. So to be able to get detail and color and all this stuff out of film prints that rivals, and in some queer cases can actually exceed the original camera negative, is a real boon for all of the films in a similar situation. And that's a lot. And it's really up to the studios whether they decide that that a given film is worth that restoration. But until now, even if they decided to do it, the technology was fairly limited. It's a lot of painting and cloning of things. And so now this technology could allow for much better restorations of films than might have ever been considered. And I can think of a number of films that I would love to see, which I know are in the same situation, that I would love to see go through a process like this. And if this restoration gets released, then I think it's a much easier case to make, because now it has a known value. Yeah, there's another shot there. There's that, and you can feel the depth. And in fact, these shots take on an almost 3D quality to them when they're restored properly. I really can't tell you why, but there's something about them that they take on a depth and dimension.
I actually took this shot. I took a still of it as much as I could, and I actually put it on top of my Star Wars arcade machine that I have here because I love this shot so much.
Right on. Yeah, that was another one of those shots that when it started to come together, it was like, dang, that looks great.
Do we have any questions for Mike? I'll unmute everybody. Let me do that right now. Anyone can unmute. I'm going to kill the screen right now. Okay, there we go. Let me unmute. Hold on a second, Mike. Dad, you have a question?
No, I just unmuted because you said he'd like you to unmute.
Oh, okay. Does anyone have any questions for Mike? Or I do have, well, I have another one because I could talk unfortunately all day, not unfortunately, but all day about this. I just I purchased the Back to the Future restoration, and I actually put it side by side on a similar TV. And aside from it just, we'll say it popping, I see some stuff they added to it, but I don't see a huge difference like what I saw with your Star Wars stuff. It is entirely night and day what you've done.
So here's the thing just about film restoration. my project is a personal project that I've funded, that I've spent the time and energy on myself. And it would not make any sense fiscally or logistically for a company. They would never have spent the money or the time on the R&D to get Star Wars to this level. It just, nobody would do it. Because ultimately any one of those restoration projects, anything that comes out on Blu-ray or streaming, is for the studios a financial decision first and foremost. And I've talked about this many times, is that, you know, you look and you see a film and you just think, wow, this is a really important film. I bet they're really, really trying. I bet they're really gonna really put all their effort into this. And that is not in any way the case. In fact, it's usually the opposite. It just comes in, it's like, here, it's this film, you've got 3 months, here's the money, get it done. And whatever it is, that's what it is. And there's a weird disparity in the restoration world between, you know, how people may feel personally about it and the gig, you know, the job. It is not like you'd think, whereas, hey, this is a really important film. You take all the time you need, tell us what the money is to get it done right. That's never been the case. So a lot of times when I look at restorations, I am seeing the billable hours and I'm going, well, that's why that shot doesn't look better, because you can't spend 6 months on that shot. You might have needed to get it right, but they're not going to pay for that. So Star Wars, in a lot of ways, this restoration represents something that you know, that nobody would pay for this. They just wouldn't. I mean, even if it's true that they would make hundreds of millions of dollars in sales, there's still this very, very bean countery, you know, business fiscal decision-making process that would forbid it. So, you know, I feel like the best of both worlds would just be, you know, I'll take the hit. I'll spend 25 years on it. I'll do it. And if you'll put it out, I think that's the deal I would ultimately be making with.
If you want to release it, do you own any of, aside from the proprietary software, which you created, do you own the compensation value of what you've done, that they can turn around and say, we can cut you a check for whatever that number would be? Clearly it's not going to give you back your time, but you did it as a passion project anyway. But I mean,
I'm not legally or in any way, it's not my film. You know, I mean, if you just decide as a passion project, you know, to restore a film and spend all this money on it, I mean, they're completely within their legal bounds to go, gee, thanks a lot. I mean, they could probably seize it for all I know. And it's never been, I never did this. There was never anything like, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to do the film. I'm going to sell it for all the money. I mean, there was never, not once was that on my mind. Would it be great to have somebody covered all these R&D expenses over the last 25 years? Yeah, sure. I'm not going to say, I'm not going to turn away the check. But that would also never stop me from pursuing a path to get it released. This was never about the money. This film changed my life. It changed a lot of people's life. It's an important part of our cultural lexicon, and it needs to survive. And that's the impetus, always will be.
It seems like this was your stepping stone, not just because it was a passion for you, because what you were able to do with this film itself, whatever you needed to do and work on with other projects down the road over the past 25 years, with this being a side project, you know, as your passion, but you now know that, okay, you've taken this, you've worked with this on this film, you know what something is going to, how it's going to work and what is not going to work. So taking that into effect, having that working knowledge of the technology and the framing and everything else could make your life a lot easier on other projects that come into your lap, more or less.
So that's true. And as an adjunct to that, almost the second conversation that anybody in one of the studios has with me after seeing these things is, well, clearly I'm anticipating monetizing these techniques. That's obviously, it's a foregone conclusion when they talk to me. Obviously, you're gonna sell your software, right? You're gonna license your techniques. This is your meal ticket. And never believe me when I say no, probably not. And the reasons are 2 or 3 or more. One of the reasons is that this restoration is far more than the techniques. I could not do this restoration by throwing bodies at it. It takes a very specialized set of skills. It would take a long time to find and recruit people with the sensibility aesthetically to do it. And it's just not, you don't push buttons. It's not algorithmically ever going to be automated. So that means that in order for you to really do these restorations, you got to be in it for the long haul, personally, creatively. You have to care about it because it's not busy work. You can't do it while you're watching something else. And so much of it requires you to be so focused on such a tiny detail for such a little thing. It's all like threading the needle. It's just like 16 hours of threading a needle. You can only do that for so long before you can't stand it anymore. So, and it's really what this process is. It is a grueling process.
Well, it's basically if you don't love what you do for your job, you shouldn't be doing your job.
So what it just means is that, okay, it's like the worst thing that would happen is somebody goes, do another film. It's like, oh God, no, I don't. I'm just going to get it through this one. Even though you've got all the technique, and people have asked me if I would do the other two films, and I've been honest with them. I'm saying, I don't like the other two films enough to do it. I guess it would have to be some huge, I mean, what is it? Is it money? I don't, if it was a huge check, would you find the energy? I don't know. But film restoration, this sort of thing is it's just a portion of what I do for my professional life. I have a design and fabrication company, and I write music mostly. So I don't want to do film restoration 20 hours a day for the rest of my life. I don't, I'd rather never ever do it again in some ways. And I know that simply licensing the technology will not get people to those sorts of results. The tools this is not the product of the tools. The tools are in service of another process, which is inescapably human and creative and requires an aesthetic, artistic sensibility. And you cannot throw bodies at this. You can't just outsource this to, like this is a favorite thing that Hollywood does, just get 1,000 Koreans to do that. That's what they do in all the visual effects movies. It's not like that. It's not like that. So you're in it for the long haul, emotionally, psychologically, just logistically, no matter how fancy your tools are. And so what you're really looking at the end is, I can sell it, but you're not gonna be able to do anything with it. And when people realize that, they're not really gonna buy it. So what I've hoped is that the techniques themselves and the process, if there was one thing I could monetize, if there was one thing that I could make a package out of, it would be teaching the aesthetic that's at work. Yeah, we have the tools. This tool helps you, but why this choice? How this solve? How did we solve this problem? That to me is the most rewarding part of it, the most unique part about it. And that would be the one that does the most good for the world, if just to teach the why, not the how. Because the how is tools, the how is software, the how is some plugins I had written. Yeah, but how did you know to use this? Why did you need this tool? What's the reason? What's the motivation? What's the process? That's a very difficult thing to teach. But if you could teach it, it's like teaching somebody music. It has the potential way beyond the actual thing,
Okay.
Hey, Mike,
I did get a question.
Mike, quick question. You said there's a movie you would like to see done. Do you know can you tell us what it is?
I mean, there are a lot of films that they just don't mean anything to the studios. I happen to love My Left Foot, because I'll never forget when Daniel Day-Lewis came out on stage and everybody collectively didn't realize he wasn't actually the guy in the movie who had severe cerebral palsy and could only use his left foot. I will never forget that experience of realizing we'd just been introduced to one of the greatest actors of all time. And that film, that experience is so much of what I love about film, is that it's is that it can have these profound effects on people, and on top of being a good story and entertaining and all the rest of it. And you experience emotions, and you go away for a couple hours and come back to your life and maybe reflect on things. But there's also all these people involved, the lighting people and the director of photography and the director and the actors. There's all these human beings that put their lives into it. And then at the end, sometimes they can really get to these magical places. And so that's just one film, which I just love the power of it. And it looks terrible. There's no transfer of that film that doesn't look like it was sitting in the back seat of somebody's car for 10 years. And that's because, you know, I mean, the studio doesn't look at that as some sort of big income source. And yet it's one of the greatest films. It's like this fantastic film. So Godfather, obvious. Yeah, obvious. You can see why they did Godfather. Sure, it's the Godfather. And the negative was in good shape. But films like, you know, My Left Foot, that are so powerful, but totally forgotten. You know, if I knew the guy, if I had a direct line to the director, I'd do it for free. Just give me the negative. We'll take care of that film. So, because it would just be great, because it's in there. That's what we learned, is there's so much in there. So, yeah.
I have another question. Someone wants to see the Alderaan explosion. So I'm going to put that on the Jerry. That was what Jerry asked. And then while I'm queuing that up, I wanted to say also that what really appealed to me also with your project is, I remember, I think it was about 10 years ago, they showed Wizard of Oz, the movie theater. I had never seen it in the movie theater. And I took my daughter to see it, and, you know, it didn't mean the same thing to her, but seeing the painting in the background that I never would have ever even paid attention to before, and the level of detail, and seeing that, and it was like an amazing experience for me. So,
you know, it's interesting, specifically about Wizard of Oz, because I think more so than any film, they've gone back and restored that film like 3-4 times, where it's like they're working on it. All right, next time we're going to go back and we're going to take everything we learned and we're going to go to the next level. And then it comes out, and then they go, all right, now what do we learn? All right, they just keep working on that film. I don't think there's any film that has had more love in it than that one. Just for what, I mean, for all sorts of obvious reasons. But to your point, that film has been exhaustively restored in a way that very few films are. It's probably the one closest in spirit to this restoration, I would think. There's a lot of love for it.
okay, this is the Alderaan scene I'm playing. Jerry Springer asked about this.
Now, there's a lot of things, you know, we're all looking at these on what is comparatively a teeny tiny little monitor. You're all seeing the before, scrub forward, and we'll get to the after. And, you know, certainly you can feel the increased contrast. So what you'll see, if you just look at the explosion, stop the explosion on the next, that's the restoration. Go back to the previous explosion. And if you look at the cloud of fire, obviously there's not as much color in it, but there's also not as much variation in the heat. This was a real explosion, and the heat has different levels. It's oranger or lighter or bluer. And so in some of what is only possible with film is that as you see the restoration, you see a lot more of the gradations in the heat. All that was in the film, but we had to selectively grab it and allow it to come out. So you get a much truer representation of the photography, and then the increased contrast. And things we're not really able to appreciate at this size is all kinds of like dust and scratches and little bits of garbage that are, I mean, which when on a 30-foot film, it just dances with garbage. You can't miss it. It's like going back now and listening to records. You know, when we were kids growing up listening to records, you stopped hearing all the crackle. And now you can't. That's all you hear. And a record, my little boy's like, "What's wrong?" It's very much the same. All that garbage is out of the restoration. You don't notice it, but today you would only notice it if you went back into a theater and saw the original version of that shot 30 feet across. It would just be like noise with hair and dust. So there's a ton of stuff in the restoration that's like that. It wipes away stuff that is now, it would only be distracting, and things that were not in the original photography, but things that showed up on the film over courses of optical printing and exposing and all that things, just dust in the air that ended up in the film. So being able to wipe those away and get back to the original photography allows you to take the shots for granted in a way creatively that you're supposed to. So that's cool. Yeah, that was a fun little shot.
I'll make a comment. Most of my experience was that, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Most of my experience with this is as a consumer and others a watcher. I don't know much about the mechanics of it, but having watched like on Sunday morning, old series like The Lone Ranger, and how the high density, the quality is incredible. And on the other hand, seeing some film clips, and I realized film clips of, say, old Super Bowls or old high school football games, and like you're just saying, the scratching is terrible. It's like a blizzard's going on. And I can't believe it was that bad back when they were done, but is there any way to enhance them? I suppose NFL Films tries to do that.
Very often, and there are, the essence of this restoration is about taking multiple copies, and you can think of them as stacking them on top of one another. You have one frame of film, and you got 5 copies of it. Each one of them is a little different. Each one of them has a piece of the puzzle, and if you could put them on top of each other and sandwich them together, they'd fill in all the holes and you'd have a complete picture. That's the essence of how this restoration works. And in most cases, you always want to go to the best case scenario. But if you go back and you have film, very often, like an old football game, there might be 6, 7 copies of that film, and it's exactly the same way. You can probably find a lot more inside of those elements if you can intelligently put them together. And it's the putting them together part, which is not the incidental part of this process. Otherwise, people would have done this a long time ago. But if you could do it, then yes, absolutely. Now, there are other techniques that we can do just as an example, for any one given, if you have a 3 frames of film of a guy running, and here he's here, and the next one he's here, and the next one he's here, and you could see them. Well, other than the guy running, very often, a lot of the stuff is the same in the frame, very similar. And so one thing we're able to say now is, well, look, the guy's running, but the background is the same. So what if we just combine the background parts from those 3 frames? That's 3 times more data. I mean, it's the same. It's just that now we can fill. So there's other ways, even when you don't have multiple sources, to get more stuff. But the very first thing you said, which is what it's really all about, is that you said, you don't know that this isn't what you do. You don't know the technical stuff. You just see it as a consumer. Ultimately, that's you represent the goal, the target. It's not to appreciate the restoration, not to appreciate or even know or have to care about anything that's going on here technically or what we had to do to get it. The idea is for you to have the experience as a consumer, just with the images and the sound and everything else in front of you that the original filmmakers intended for you to have. And all of this is in service of that experience. And it's not supposed to be appreciated. It's supposed to be, you don't even see it. You don't notice it. All you notice is the story and the characters, and you're hearing the music, and you empathize and feel the emotion. So while there's a lot to it technically, we can never be impressed with ourselves from a technical standpoint, because the only thing that matters is whether or not the average person can feel the film and feel the experience of the film to the greatest, most effective degree possible. It's really
if it wouldn't adulterate it, I mean, to see, say, a Super Bowl from 50 years ago, to have the colors, cleaned up, and the facts are still there, but and I haven't seen that yet. I don't know whether that's coming or just costs too much money.
So So, you can see how obviously for you and me, for a lot of people, like even if you did a series of like, you know, the 10 most landmark groundbreaking Super Bowls or whatever it was, like 10 favorite Super Bowls, and did those, they'd have a huge market for it. But I can guarantee you that nobody in possession of NFL vintage historical films knows anything about this process. The worlds haven't connected yet. As small as the worlds will be at some point, that's why I'm saying if this restoration came out and went wide, no shortage of people would have ideas for what to do with it. There's no question. So places like that, and great boxing films. I mean, there's tons of places where you can see that this sort of thing would make a huge difference, and allow you to appreciate those moments in sports history or in. I mean, think about the amount of work that's been done on the moon landings or on the Zapruder film. I mean, there are plenty of watershed moments in history in which we recognize that getting the cleanest images that we can is important for the preservation of these images. So yeah, there's no shortage of ways in which you could use this.
Well, the same thing with live war movies, Vietnam, whatever, World War II. I mean, there's a tremendous collection on the government side. If it's politically correct to clean them up, especially the Vietnam ones, which I've seen a lot of, the helicopters coming in, that kind of thing. They're really rough around the edges.
For sure, and I mean, and on some level, I think we would all want to at least believe that the historical truth of it and what we gain from that as a people should trump the en vogue political correctness that comes and goes. A society may at any one time become more liberal or more puritanical, or it may go up and down, but facts are facts. History is history. The Vietnam War happened, and just like when people talk about honoring all of the horrors of the Holocaust, the idea is specifically not to brush it under the rug, but to learn from it and preserve it. That's what the museums are about, and that's what that. So to that, by that argument, yeah, if we have footage on the Vietnam War, it should be let's have it preserved at the highest quality. It's the same thing as that great Super Bowl, or as the Zapruder film, or the moon landing, or any of the other things which, for whatever reason, become watershed moments in our cultural lexicon. If we have a technology in order to preserve those moments to the best degree possible, I'll give you another example, which just happens to be the case. Beethoven wrote the Fifth Symphony 200 years ago. Fortunately, we are not beholden to the recording technology of 200 years ago. Otherwise, none of us would have ever heard the Fifth. So it happens to be that because it's preserved on paper, we can perform the Fifth Symphony today, right now. In fact, we could perform it exactly like it sounded when he wrote it. So preserving the accomplishments and better or worse of human beings is part of what we do. And if technology can come in and play a role and help us with that, then all the better, all the better. So yeah, on some level, it's like we're talking about this little science fiction film here, but yeah, those techniques could be used to preserve the images of the Vietnam War. Absolutely.
Well, I'm thinking, I grew up in Walter Cronkite, all those World War II series, back in the 50s and 60s. Anyway, thank you.
Of course. Yeah. That's a really great point about the importance, especially today, where people will look at, like my son growing up in the aesthetic that he grows up, he will look at an image and may be inclined to dismiss it. Oh, that's old. Like it doesn't have any value. It's not relevant anymore. It's old looking. And so, while it's easy to say, no, it's important, you need to look at it. It's also if you can make it that much more palatable and do what we're talking about, wipe away the stuff that would stop you from dealing with the content. Just if there's stuff on the surface that's distracting you from the content, which technically we could get rid of, so that it's a pure line to the actual substance. Great. Then the sky's the limit. in terms
I
of,
have a follow-up question of what Dave was talking about. You're talking about the war, from either Vietnam era, Korea, the Second World War. What about with like United States history? You have the film, the footage of the assassination of John F. Kennedy from Dallas. You have what other historical type of um, different points of reference. Now, to take those films and to put it more in an educational, not just a history type of a class, but a film education type of class that could be taught within the universities, because this says, okay, you have this. If they want to become a restaurator, for film or anything like that, that this is the steps, to teach, to show the differences of what original film capture was, whether it was from an 8mm, whether it was from whatever type of film they were using back in the day, because I know with now in Hollywood, with the celluloid films and the reels and everything else, some of these old Westerns and everything else are deteriorating.
absolutely. Well, and if I could push your point, maybe, if you are teaching, if you're doing that, what you suggest, teach the essence of film restoration, these techniques, and it's not just in a historical context, but in this other context that you proposed, you would be simultaneously, either tacitly or directly, encouraging the importance of history and looking at history and learning from history and examining all the stuff that's come before us, which I could make an argument would be sorely would be really good for us, because mine is a generation that did not have to go to war to win this country. I never went to war. I didn't. I didn't. Everything, all the privileges and freedoms I've enjoyed were given to me, and that sets anybody up for taking it for granted and dismissing all of the sacrifices and history that the country had to go through in order to provide this situation for me. To just, they're out of sight, out of mind. That happened. I don't know. All I'm really worried about is me and my petty concerns today. And I certainly know for myself and for my son, teaching present gratitude for what we have and for the country is something that we have to work on, because we don't have because we didn't have to earn it. If some part of the education of children is here's why we do restorations, here's why we preserve our history, here's why we're going to look at the Vietnam War and make sure it's clear, then you are very directly connecting them to the past, to the thing that the shoulders of giants that they end up standing on. And I think that could go a long way toward generating gratitude and a sense of unity. Dare I say, nationalistic pride. Or if nothing else, a way in which we understand the human equation. That we're part of. I mean, I know you probably didn't anticipate it to go there, but that was my first thought is, man, if everybody spent that time, really looking at historical stuff, good and bad and indifferent, then we're connected to the past in a way that otherwise you don't have to be anymore. You can know nothing about this country and nothing about history and how we got here. You can know nothing about the World War, and it has nothing to do with how you're going to tweet your friends all the rest of that day. And that ultimately is destructive to our community and sense of unity. So wouldn't that be an unusual way to turn this little film restoration thing on its head? But yeah, I'm for that.
I'll take one more question from Mike. Anyone else have another question? Bueller.
I'm impressed anybody hung in for this. I appreciate it.
Okay, well, I thank you so much for your time, Mike. I really, really, really appreciate it. And you're dead. Without a doubt, you were the highlight of my year, which has basically been trapped in front of the computer screen because of COVID. But and the positive is the fact that I was sitting in my basement working, and it popped on. Your video popped up on May the 4th, and having to get to watch it, I got to meet you tonight. So thank you so much for your time.
I really, actually really appreciate being invited on, and obviously I will talk forever about this. But it was just really unexpected, and I appreciate the invite. So anytime you think of something else you want me to blather on about, you let me know.
I definitely will. I'll keep you up on that. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, guys. Good night. Thank you so
Thanks,
Mike.
Hi, Mike. Thanks.
Mike, thank you very much.
Thanks. Good night, guys.
Okay, let's do our closing, guys. At this point, I have some announcements. Thank you also for everyone sticking in on that. I know we were a while, but I hope everyone enjoyed the meeting tonight. Announcements, November 14th at 8 p.m. Saturday night, we are doing bingo. If you're interested, please contact Fred Rudrick for more information for that. We're going to figure out how we're going to get cards or email them out to people. And or prizes, we will let you know on that. But it should be a fun thing to do on a Saturday night in 2 weeks. And lastly, on December 5th, we're having a stated meeting. I'm assuming it's going to be via Zoom because of what has recently happened with the club, which I'll talk about in a second. The current speaker is Nolan Bushnell, who is the founder of Atari and Chuck E. Cheese. It should be also interesting. I'm hammered down with his PR reps right now. So that's that. One more thing, please keep Gary Portnoy in your prayers. And unfortunately, all of us know there was air on Saturday. Gary ended up with COVID, and I'm in everyone's thoughts and prayers right now as we're all dealing with this pandemic. Even though we thought we did everything we possibly can do, one of our members got sick. So I hope everyone continues to stay healthy and happy, and we soon come out of this, and we are stronger for this. And I have nothing else. At this point, I'm going to call upon our illustrious sir, Ed Blum, to give the final speak, and I will gavel with a lightsaber for tonight. Sir, the floor is yours. You got on mute, though. There we go.
Where'd you go? He left.
No, he's still there. Hold on.
He's muted.
Hold on.
I don't see him on the screen.
While you're getting him, Albert, that was a lovely comment. I laughed my ass off.
What was his comment? I didn't even know.
It wasn't to you. It was to me.
Oh, okay.
There you go.
Illustrious sir, you have the floor. Can't hear you.
He's got laryngitis.
No. I want to.
And Ellie laughed her ass off too.
Okay.
You want to tell them what it was, or should we leave them all in suspense?
Sure.
So when I put out the
diagnosis, if it burns
Hold on, Bart. Let me kill this.
like hell when you pee,
you're breaking up. You're breaking up.
Hold on. Let me kill the audio before we do this. Hold on. I want to kill the recording. So hold on.